based here on the Streatham campus. For those of you that are not from the university or just simply don't know much about it, it's basically the outward-facing part of the university, and we work very closely with external stakeholders, primarily businesses and industry partners. I've got the lovely job of working with communities. So my role is Impact and Partnership Development Manager for communities.
You need to be over the arrow.
Oh, I need to be over the arrow, of course, yes. I was hoping, I did invite two other colleagues to, well, one internal colleague and Katherine Ford from the Pelican Project to present with me today. Unfortunately, neither of them have been able to come, so it is just me today, I'm afraid. So, just thought we'd quickly sort of run through what we're trying to talk about today. I'm hopefully not going to be talking at you the whole time. I want this to be as interactive as possible. And despite Anne's lovely introduction, I don't consider myself to be an expert in evaluating engagement. So please feel free to chip in at any stage to ask questions or add to the conversation. I really want this to be as much of a dialogue as possible. So we're going to be talking a little bit about public and community engagement. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the project that Anne just mentioned, talking about the way that we were trying to understand certain process of community engagement. Then we'll go on to look at evaluation itself and why we should be evaluating our engagement and thinking about how we can plan engagement and go through the different processes of how we can do that and methods of collecting data. And then at the end, I think if it can work this way, we can have a little go ourselves at trying to plan, look at some scenarios, maybe your own plans for engagement, or I've got a few scenarios that we can work at in groups and try and plan some activity, some evaluation for those activities. I'm not going to dwell on this slide for very long because I assume that the mere fact that you're all here means that you know a little bit about public engagement, or at least have an interest in it, or at the very least have some plans to embed public engagement in your own work. We'll go around the table in a minute trying to get to know a little bit more about what people are doing. But while I don't want to get embroiled in the different definitions of public engagement and the semantics of engagement versus involvement, I think today we just want to talk broadly about public engagement, community engagement, and just, I think this definition from the NCCP quite clearly states that engagement can be about a broad array of things. It can be about a single activity, which might be a workshop or a focus group with a small number of people, or it could be about co-production of a large study where you've got patient and stakeholder involvement right from the beginning, the inception of the question, research question, right through to the determination of the results. So we're looking at that more broadly today and not just focusing on one narrow aspect of it. The other thing that I'd like to take home from this definition is the fact that engagement is very much a two-way process. It's not about one person standing at the front and talking to everybody else. It's about that two-way engagement and mutual benefit on all parties. Just to say, this is the definition used by the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement. If you haven't been to their website already, do so, because they provide an awful lot of resources for academics and researchers who are interested in public engagement. And they're a wonderful group of people and just very, very useful resource to have if you are.
I think it's worth saying that although they are sort of
useful resources that might be helpful for future. Okay, so I'll come back to myself for a minute and tell you a little bit more about me and my interests. I sit within the regional impact team here at the university, and I'm very much interested in the relationship between the university and the local community. So I'm really keen to provide more opportunities for researchers and students to engage locally and provide that mechanism for there to be sort of projects, locally based projects where communities can work with our academic knowledge for the mutual benefit of both parties. So for students perhaps to find local societal challenges that they can work on, and for academics to be able to help local organisations and groups answer some of their questions. So I think the reason why Anne invited me here today was because of this project, and I will tell you a little bit about how that came about, because of my interest in the engagement between the researcher and the community, we were wondering about that whole dynamic, the relationship between the researcher and the community when they are engaging. I'm wondering whether we can try and drill down what is important about the way that researchers and communities engage with each other in terms of trying to find mutual benefits. So this project that I worked on, sorry, I'm just trying to find where I'm going next. So I'm on the wrong one. Sorry, I do. So this project involved a series of workshops where we brought together some researchers and their community partners, and we tried to understand their relationship and what worked for them and what didn't work for them. And the first question we asked them was, sorry, wrong slide. Why do we engage with each other? You know, why do academics engage with communities, and why do communities engage with academics? And overwhelmingly, the reason that was more important to more people was to have an impact on society. They also wanted to give the community a voice. Both sides wanted to learn something new, to access expertise, and whether that was academic expertise or whether that was experiential knowledge and expertise. They wanted to improve what they did, add perspective to their research, and to democratise knowledge, so make sure that their learnings were spread beyond just the four walls of the university. And I think this quite nicely demonstrates the mutual benefits that the NCTP definition talks about. So both sides want to make sure that they're achieving mutual benefit. But how do we create a mutually beneficial partnership where we've got fairness and equity within that partnership, where both voices can be heard, where we feel that everybody's got parity within that relationship? And I think there's two questions that we first need to ask, and that is, are we engaging with the right people? Have we got the right audience? Have we got the right people in the room? And secondly, is everybody given an equal opportunity to be heard? So when we started to drill this down and trying to unpick what it was that contributed to an equal and a fair partnership, sorry, I forget that I've clicking on the wrong thing.
Shall I operate that?
How does that work? I've got animation on there and it doesn't seem to be working through.
It will.
Oh, I've got to go on there each time, sorry. Okay.
Just kick me out.
So we're trying to unpick what it was that people felt was important to creating this safe space for people to be able to talk openly and equally. And obviously a whole myriad of things contribute to this equal partnership. And we found that we could sort of group these things into 6 different themes. Physical environment, I'm probably all right again now, Anne. Now I've learned again. I've broken it. So the physical environment and engagement space, so that's just creating a safe space for people to feel that they can talk openly, providing them with refreshments, the things that would come naturally in a good positive relationship. Talking about the structure of the partnership and the governance, so the way it's managed and funded, that's always important in creating that fairness. Characteristics of the individuals involved. I know this isn't something that you could necessarily do anything about in your group, but it's something that you can very much be aware of. Certain characteristics are more likely to make for an easier and equal relationship. The relational or group characteristics, so we're talking about the interplay here between the community, between and sort of intra relationship between the different people within that partnership. The wider communication between partnership members, so that just means the way that meetings are convened and whether meetings are held face-to-face or via telephone, via Skype, and just general communications in the way that people communicate via email, what have you. And ongoing support and training for partnership members was also deemed to be really important for making sure that the partnership worked successfully. But the area that I was most concerned with and most interested in looking at was this here, the relational or group characteristics. So these characteristics, that the way that people listen and relate to each other within that partnership, trying to understand what it was that could contribute to a positive, mutually beneficial relationship, and whether we could sort of learn from that and perhaps nuance our future engagement to, oh, that didn't work very well, oh, that's fine. So that we can nuance our future engagements to make them more successful. And when we really drill down to it, these are the things that the people within our workshops, so we're talking about researchers and community partners here, so both sides of the partnership, things that they really felt were important in creating that safe space where people could create the benefit for both sides. And I don't think there's anything really surprising on here, but the things that perhaps we need to think about, if we are looking at our partnerships: trust, encouragement, listening to all discussions, taking turns, mutual respect. I think the mutual respect and reciprocity comes into it an awful lot. People are just so keen to make sure that there's fairness on both sides. So these are the sort of things that people felt were really, really important in contributing to that positive, mutually beneficial partnership. But interestingly, what we also found was that when you look at the research, when you look at the published research, very few studies actually report on these dynamics. And while lots of authors stress the significance of trust or respect, of effective communication, very few authors actually discuss how or why the group actually plays out like this, or whether they in fact evaluated it. So our discussions with in our workshops were, is this important? Should we be capturing this? Is this something that we can learn from? And it's difficult because, yes, in an ideal world, we want to be able to learn from our partnerships, and we want to be able to capture what worked and what didn't work. But at the end of the day, evaluation needs to be appropriate and proportionate to the activities that we're taking on. And I think the underlying take-home message from our workshops was, we don't know, mixed messages. There could be value in creating some tools to help us capture those microdynamics, as I like to call it, between individuals, but it isn't necessarily going to be useful to everybody's engagement. So we've yet to decide whether to take this on any further. But at this stage, I was hoping that we could have Kath was going to talk to us about her perspective, because Kath works for a local organisation called the Pelican Project, and I was hoping that she could talk to us about her involvement with both the project that I've just talked about, but also the Pelican Project and ways that they evaluate. She sent me some slides. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today, but she has sent me some handouts, and I will send those on to you, because she did some really nice creative ways of engaging, evaluating their engagement, and that would have slipped in quite nicely here, but I will pass those on to everybody anyway. But I think just in terms of deciding what we should be evaluating, I think it is part of the bigger picture of so what, at the end of the day, what we're doing this for. And I just thought we might start at this stage now to think, why do we evaluate? What is the point in evaluating our engagement? I know that Sarah touched on a couple of the points earlier, but can we think about what it is, the purpose of evaluating our engagement activities?
Well, it's to demonstrate effectiveness, isn't it? To provide the basis of a model that can be used elsewhere, that the lessons can be transferred, and you generally get a sort of a growth of this sort of activity, because part of the problem with this is that it's a great project individually, but it is a drop in the ocean compared to picture more widely.
So it's about sharing.
Yeah.
sharing what works and what doesn't
Sharing,
work.
exactly.
Yeah.
What the pitfalls are as well,
Yeah.
as much
Yeah,
as the
absolutely.
positives.
Yeah. Anybody want to add to anything?
It's also about how we measure the effectiveness. So we want to measure it, but it's also our understanding of what successful might evolve as we evaluate.
Yes.
And it may not be as we thought when the project set out.
Yeah.
That's sometimes important.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to be open to the possibility that success might look different
Yeah.
in the middle than you might have postulated at the beginning. And you have to, online people have turned your microphones back on so you can speak. Oh, it's at Lara who's turned herself off again.
It could affect policy as well. I mean, we've got a situation where it's got this far along the road where that discussion is starting to be had, which would be very exciting because people could literally feel within the community that their voice was both being heard and was actually might well help shape something.
Yes.
You don't get that kind of participatory whitewash, do you? Which you actually, there is a sense that something could happen.
Yeah. And it's just
Darwin
demonstrating
says we also evaluate to expand the parameters of evaluation in non-academic settings.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one, yes, but it's not, rather than about weighing the clapping or counting the heads, it's about exploring nuances of engagement as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bramwell.
I like that.
There's always a financial, framework in there. So, for instance, with our Mid-Devon project, it's also about our funders' requirements.
Yeah.
And there's, and if a business was doing it, it would be similarly, there'd be a financial element to the whole.
Yeah. So it's demonstrating
value for money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've covered them all. Let's have a look.
Related to the value for money issue, is there a kind of future grants or
Yes.
service as well? Is it like showing that there's a process of reflection, showing that there's some kind of reflection contribute to that?
Horrible, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. So we can. Yeah, absolutely. So we can.
I'll have to mute everyone again. Sorry.
Unless anybody's got. It's quite a delay.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Picks up everything. Okay, so the ones I've got here, and I'm sure this isn't totally exhaustive, but why evaluate? I've written to help us plan and manage our engagement activities, to assess the effectiveness of our approach, which I think is very important, as we were just saying here, to increase accountability. Now, is our project value for money? And I think this is really fundamental when we're all looking for the next dollar to fund the next project. To evidence impact. There's no point in doing these things if there is no long-term impact, and to learn from our experience and improve our practice. So, you know, I think that's a large aspect of why we evaluate, to understand whether, you know, what we did actually worked and what didn't work. And as somebody just said here, that's equally as important, understanding what didn't work so that we can share that with others to inform what they and what we do next. Okay, so I've gone back to the wonderful NCCP here again for just their summary of what evaluation is. And they say it's a process of collecting evidence and reflection that will help you understand the dynamics and effect of your work and help inform future projects or approaches. Used correctly, evaluation is a valuable tool that enables you to learn from your experiences and to assess the impact of your work. Done badly, it's probably not worth doing at all. Okay. So, just, you know, to start thinking about how we might start looking at evaluation, and of course this is going to be different for depending on the sort of evaluation that you're looking at. But broadly speaking, you know, we need to plan. Think about what you're doing. Choose the focus and scale of your evaluation. As I previously alluded to, your evaluation needs to be proportionate to your activities and your budget. If you're only doing a very small engagement project, there's no point in coming out with a very, very elaborate evaluation plan. You won't have the time or the resources for it. And it's also important not to collect any more data or information than you're able to use that's going to be useful to you, because that's a waste of your time, the people that you're engaging with time, and you know, an exploitation of data. Make an evaluation plan. This will help you think through what you're trying to achieve and help you collect the relevant data as you go. So it's just really important just to try and you know, focus your ideas right from the beginning. If you are only going to do a quick evaluation, have a very clear focus on exactly what you want to find out. Is it that you just want quick feedback on delivery and immediate outputs, or are you looking to evaluate the longer picture, the longer term impacts, and report those in an academic publication or to anybody that you might be interested in the findings? So before you start, it's really important to find the scope and purpose of the engagement, find who are your target audiences, who are your publics. You know, we use the term public very, very broadly. Be quite clear about who your public is, and whether that is the local community, whether that's a broader public. You know, you just got to be clear about who you're trying to engage with. And what do you both want to get from this engagement? You know, as I say, it's all about mutual benefits. So what do you and they want to get from the process of engaging? To find the scale of the engagement. Again, you know, we've already talked about a whole array of different projects. Some are going to be one-off isolated activities. Some might be one-off activities that's part of a larger ongoing programme, and some like a long-term clinical study where when you're co-creating the research question, and you know, it might be a 5-year study when you're looking at getting patient involvement at every stage of the process. You know, it might be a much bigger scale project. So think about what it is, the size of the engagement, and start thinking about what the evaluation at each stage of that's going to be. So define the scope, purpose and scale of your evaluation. And we'll go on to talk about this more in a moment. But is it to inform the effective design or the execution of the engagement activities, or to report what has happened as a consequence of engaging with those audiences? And think about who the evaluation is for. You know, who you're going to be reporting back to. Is it your funders, or is it to the community to say, yes, you know, this is how we may be able to work together? So think very carefully about who will be using the results. Oops, can't do it left-handed. So, in terms of putting an evaluation plan together, and I have to confess, I have taken most of these slides either directly from the NCCP or sort of like photoed them around a bit. So obviously you will be able to have these slides, but again, do go back to the NCCP website, and there are lots of other resources to help you think about your evaluation. But really, just generally, you want to think about the overarching aim of the activity. What's the purpose of your engagement? What are the specific objectives that you're going to be looking at? What are going to be your evaluation questions and the indicators? You know, what's going to indicate whether this has worked or hasn't worked? And then you can start thinking about some data collection tools. You know, are you going to be using qualitative data? So it's all going to be about focus groups,
Sorry to interrupt. Just see, Catherine's put her hand up, and there's a note about the sound being gone, and I'm not sure if that means the speakers or if they can hear your.
I'll type. You carry on talking. Thanks. Yes.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, how are you going to collect your data? You know, is it going to be a straightforward questionnaire or survey? Is it going to be a focus group when you're collecting qualitative data and information? Or are you going to be a little bit more creative than that? And I'd really like to think that there are some people here who can come up with some really fantastic and innovative ways of collecting the information that you want from the engagement activities that you're going to be looking at. Yeah, you can borrow it back. Think ahead. towards your data analysis, what you're going to be doing with that data. Don't forget that any data that you collect, you really should be doing something with. So think about what you're going to do with it, how you're going to do it, whether you've got the skills to be analysing it yourself or whether you have to bring somebody else in to help you do that.
So yeah,
Sorry.
I think it seems to be just Katherine
Okay.
who's suffering. Yes.
Oh, bless. And finally, think about reporting and dissemination. Again, it's really important that whatever you do, you share it. Certainly with those that you've engaged with, and as wide as possible, as wide as is going to be useful, I would say. So think about all of these things when you're starting to put your evaluation plan together. And ideally, you want to be doing that now. As soon as you start thinking of doing any sort of engaging with external stakeholders, you need to start thinking this process through. So really, just broadly speaking, how are we doing for time? Yeah, I think that's fine. Sweet. Yeah. Broadly speaking, we tend to think of there being 3 ways to evaluate engagement. So we can either evaluate the design of the engagement activities for a given purpose or context. So we need to think about whether that design follows good practice, whether it's underpinned by sound ethics, and that's something, again, that you need to be thinking of if you're going to be collecting people's data and then reporting it back. Certainly in a publication, you need to think about ethics. And are you avoiding any known issues that commonly lead to failure? So look in the literature, talk to other people who are doing this sort of activity, and just make sure that your design is sound and appropriate. Is whatever you're doing appropriate and relevant for the context? Are you taking into account the needs, priorities of those who are taking part? Think about who you're engaging with, where you're engaging with them. Think back to that physical space. Are you going to them as opposed to expecting them to come to you? So just overall, generally think about the design of your engagement. So this is the first stage of evaluating the design itself. Secondly, we can evaluate the delivery and the immediate outputs of the engagement activities. Often I think we think about assessing engagement activities in terms of the number of people that turn up. And maybe, how with a variety of different people, you've got 10 different people from 6 different organisations. Yeah, that's great, that I've achieved. But we need to think about the quality of engagement. And good quality engagement can deliver some really, really good outcomes. Whereas, as I said earlier, the bad engagement is often just not worth doing at all. So we need to think about the delivery and immediate outputs. Has the public engagement activity met its targets and objectives? So that again, perhaps we're saying, well, we held this activity and we really wanted 30 people to turn up. And perhaps you count the number of people and yes, they have turned up. But also, what were the immediate outputs that you were expecting to get from that conversation? Did you achieve those immediate outputs? So think about what you're expecting to or hoping to get from each engagement activity. Try and unpick what worked well, what worked less well, and what really wasn't worth doing at all. Try to think about how you might improve upon this for future activities, and again, share your lessons learned, because other people would really be interested to hear about what doesn't work to prevent them making the same mistake themselves. And then the third aspect of engaging is evaluating the impact of the activities. So, we need to consider what sort of impacts we might expect as a result of engagement, on the participants, the researchers, and anybody else that's involved with these activities. And somebody mentioned policy earlier. What are the long-term implications? Could we be affecting policy? Is that our ultimate aim? If so, outline it from the beginning, and aim to understand whether you have and follow any opportunities. Whether there has been a change of policy, whether it's locally, regionally, or what have you. And depending on how indirect these long-term impacts might be, you might need to think about designing additional evaluation activities further down the line, because obviously impact doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it takes years to actually achieve impact. Certainly if you're affecting policy, it doesn't happen overnight. So just think about whether you might need to think about additional evaluation activities further down the line. And it's also worth thinking about whether your activities might be leading to unplanned impacts, and they might be positive or negative impact. But again, just think about impacts over the long term and how you might be able to capture those and evaluate them. And I'm not going to go into detail on this. Some people really like logic models. They can provide a very visual framework for capturing your project and consider what's feeding into project, what your inputs, what your outputs, what are the contextual factors that might play into this. Again, some people like them, some people don't. I've got another one here, look, which is a more visual model of how that might look. But as I said, some people like them, some people don't, but it might sort of help you create that framework around thinking about what your long-term outcomes and impacts might be. So I think I'm coming to the end. Oh, well, there we go. Data. Think about what sort of information you're going to be gathering. Can we think, what sort of ways can we collect our data? We've certainly touched upon some of them. Has anybody already begun to design a method of collecting their data from their evaluation?
Drawing, mapping.
This says the artist, I love it. Most people say questionnaire.
Conversation.
I think it's brilliant that drawing is the first one.
I know, I love it. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Online people, you can speak.
Just don't say questionnaire.
Katherine, you can go ahead. Katherine? No? Okay. Not speaking.
Nobody's speaking.
Well, I mean, there's lots of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's endless. It's also has to reflect who
you're working with, exactly.
And
Absolutely.
it has to reflect the question you're asking.
Yeah.
So it's I know I said drawing, but it isn't always, is it?
No, but it is, as we've got to think about, as you say, the sort of information we're trying to gather, the people that you're working with, the environment that you're working in. So questionnaires and surveys, 3D post-it feedback is a very straightforward to run. Workshops or focus groups a little bit more complicated to set up. Interviews. Reflective diaries, I think they are a great idea, for capturing people's thoughts, either immediately, during the process or immediately afterwards. And I just think that allows some more space for honesty as well sometimes. Graffiti wall, I think this is quite a common one that we see in conferences and that sort of area where people can just come up and write their thoughts or express it in a drawing. Quizzes, if you're that way inclined. Postcards, there's a whole load. Observation, tally counting, buckets evaluation, if it's just numbers that you want, or a vote count or spot voting, it's quite a straightforward one. Feedback forms, media analysis, mobile event app. I've not used one of these. Have you? Yeah.
They can be really useful. There's lots of different ways of, and a lot of them are just about capturing numbers. It's just about somebody clicking on a QR code as they go in. So it's just about capturing who's moving through.
Yeah.
But you can use event apps to kind of pop up questions.
Okay.
And sometimes you can have them if you've got an exhibit that, as somebody's standing in front of an exhibit, it pops up a question about that. So you can be as creative as your skills.
On there as well.
You can be as creative as your skills allow you to be.
Rubbish
This was absolutely rubbish. I hated this one. Yeah, you can. It depends.
Okay. Yeah. No, I've not. I'm aware of them, but never had the opportunity to use them. So I'd be interested to see those.
It all depends as well, obviously, on the time that you've got.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, again, being proportionate. Yeah.
I've found in the past things like interviews. For some audiences, they won't work. But a conversation,
Yes.
that if you have time for that conversation to meander and the trust to build and it to happen over several days, you get a different thing to an interview.
Yeah.
You have to be really careful with interviews, and it's really dependent on the kind of activity you're running. Because if you're running something like a kind of a demonstration, a display where people can wander in and out at will, it's really hard to get people even for a short interview. But if it's a thing with a fixed time and everybody's coming out of the door, you can capture people. So you have to think quite carefully about the kind of activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I've just got a couple of notes on here again. And again, I think these are things I've touched upon already, or we have collectively. Make sure you've got enough allocated time, whatever you do, and invariably these things often take longer than we anticipate. So make sure that you've got the time to collect the information that you want to collect. Think about it in advance, like printing. If you've got a questionnaire, make sure that you remember to print it before you go there. If you need consent forms, again, I'm guilty of that, forgetting to get the forms or get them printed and then forget to bring them down to you. Check you have enough time, people, instruments, whatever it is that you're using. Make sure you've got enough of those to be able to do this properly. And make sure that you've got procedures in place to protect data. If you're talking about people's personal data, make sure that you've got all the mechanisms in place to protect data and privacy.
Don't let them leave the workshop or the meeting without having completed their evaluation.
Yes, absolutely. Sounds everybody.
No, I disagree. Not completing the evaluation form is feedback in itself.
I don't agree. You've got to put something down. They can spoil their ballot paper if they like, but
And you've got to make it accessible, because there could be a range of needs. And I know I was very lucky to work with Dr. Charlotte Patterson, who came up with the Measure Yourself Medical Outcome Profile, and I was one of the people that we worked with. And what that taught me very much, what came out of that was, in a way, who owns what it is that you actually want, who's going to be the most empowered person. And in that system, the situation might be, for instance, you might have an intervention and you say to the person, what would you like out of this? So they score at the baseline. Say they would like to walk upstairs, maybe they're going to use a therapeutic intervention that might help them in some way, but they'd say, well, actually what I want is to walk upstairs. That would make the difference to me. And so they score how well they're walking upstairs now, and then afterwards, and they own that. That is such a powerful outcome.
I was involved with a similar study where we were looking at patients with a very rare condition, and we were creating a database to capture all the information and medical data about all these people. And it was only when we got some patients in with these conditions that they said, you haven't even asked a question about sleep. I can't sleep at night, and it's the most, it's the hardest aspect of the condition. It was only when we talked to the patients that's what, gave us that vital bit of information. And this is why we engage. We engage with those people that are going to be able to inform our research from a research and academic point of view. So I totally agree. But yes, think about who does own that data and what you're going to be able to do with it.
Anyone online want to contribute anything? Alex, go ahead. I
was just going to ask a dangerous question about ethics, and where we, as was mentioned earlier, we start collecting data to actually use in some form of evaluation that will potentially publish, whether it's worth, if once we start working with these kind of groups, to actually build into any ethics application that would be happening anyway, the fact that we'll be collecting data for evaluation on the process itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say definitely. If you're going to be, I think that is one of the biggest problems with evaluating public engagement, because people don't necessarily think that this is an ethical issue, but it is absolutely. If you were collecting information on people and potentially going to be publishing it, any self-respecting journal, or most self-respecting journals, will expect you to have received ethical approval to have collected that data in the first place. So definitely, and this is why, think about the whole engagement process and the way that you're going to evaluate it as early as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Could I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
What kind of thing do you have in mind when you think of media analysis?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, no. I mean,
media analysis. That was one that Sylvia added onto my slides, in all fairness, and she was hoping to be here today as well. I presume that is
sort of social media.
Could be social media. Yeah, I would think that is social media. So there's sort of social network analysis, that sort of thing, which is becoming increasingly used for all sorts of research and research questions, and it's fascinating. But
which ethically is also
is really tricky. Yeah,
because I was thinking about kind of newspaper media as well, and how in one project I was involved with, we had a lot of media attention.
Yeah.
Not always positive.
Yeah.
And we were really interested to look at that analytically, and at the time I don't think we really saw it as an evaluation, but I was just curious to think about how.
I think that's an evaluation, but not necessarily of your public engagement, is it? That's an evaluation. All right. Yeah, that's quite an interesting question.
And it links with the comment Bramwin's made, which is what kinds of issues are involved in studying, e.g. when you're evaluating cultural change in medical and institutional settings. Evaluation is a highly politicised process, and institutions often want access to evaluation materials, but yet further collaboration is contingent on granting that access. So it's a more political and a more involved situation than we might at first think. Thank you, Bramwin.
Yeah.
I mean, looping back to the media, from an arts perspective, I would think of media as being potentially different art forms. So if people are drawing or writing or photographing or working with textiles, whatever the medium is, there is some process where you can kind of through looking at what people make, why they've made it, what that might be saying. I mean, it can have a subjective aspect, I guess. Sort of coming back to your point about ask people, what's going on in your thinking of the piece.
Yeah, no, I've got to admit that I didn't really think of what that could mean, but I think clearly it could mean lots of different things. But
I think Katherine had a comment.
Katherine?
I know. I really like Owen's comment about the issues and about how evaluation is highly politicized. I actually wanted to build on that by saying I think there's a potential danger if we don't actually think about the fact that it's not just this engaged evaluation, it's that all evaluation is already politicized, but there's an inherent acceptance of that, that especially because a lot of it is driven by financial activity, or financial requirement, and it is the body that you need to report to in order to maintain that engagement, that relationship, that there's always a kind of two-way thing going on in all of the relationships that we're talking about, and that includes those that are enabling the work, and that is an engagement in and of itself. But there's something in all of this that's about altering of a kind of power dynamic and who gets listened to a little bit, I think, and to me that sounds like what this approach to engaged evaluation is. It's not only about being engaged in the process of evaluation, it's actually evaluating engagement and taking a different view on whose view matters, including the people who are delivering the project, who actually arguably are experts in the work in question, but often are subject to precarious funding or precarious power dynamic, I suppose, in in the medical world, if you're a patient, you are reliant on your care team. And so there's something underlying all of this that is politicized, but it's also an important power dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
I think that's something we haven't touched on actually, is this, we often think of evaluation as quite a top-down process, it's done by somebody, but I think increasingly, it's certainly in the centre, what we're looking at is co-creation of evaluation, so about working as a group, as a community to work out what matters for your work is really important.
Yeah, and that's why I was really hoping that we could have had Kath with us today, but I'm sure that many of you can add this perspective anyway, because in the community engagement evaluation workshops that we ran, it was trying to understand what they do, and already lots of the community members were saying, "Oh no, we don't evaluate. No, we don't evaluate. No." We often will have lots of discussions afterwards, and somebody might make notes, of what they liked and what they didn't like. But they said, well, that is evaluation. You are collecting that information. And this slide here I've just added. So this was the sort of things that came out of the workshops that I ran. How can we evaluate our engagement? So these were suggestions from both researchers and community members. I've jumbled them up, so I haven't sort of split them into one group or another, because they were all with the same purpose really. But there's some really nice ones there. Use art to express emotions. I thought was a really nice one, and use ethnography to evaluate, which I thought was very interesting. That's not something that I'm familiar with, but I'm sure that could be quite an interesting process.
If you're observing, you're kind of ethnographying.
That's right. Yeah.
Just invented a new word.
But I think certainly, if you should be co-creating your evaluation plan with those that you're engaging with. Think about it collectively, and like everything else, do it together. So yeah, I think that's sort of the last of the slides. Oh no, one more. Sorry, I have got a couple more. Moving on quickly, just quickly getting on to analysing data. I think again we've touched upon most of this already, but consider the methods that you'll be using to analyse the data, and whether you or somebody within your team has the means and the resources and the skills to be able to do that. Again, I'll reiterate, don't collect any information that you haven't got the skills or the resources or the need for. Consider who will be involved in interpreting the analysis, and whether this will include publics under the stakeholders, there we go, in addition to the research themselves. So again, include your stakeholders and those that you're engaging with in the actual analysis itself. And then in terms of using the evaluation results, think about how we're going to use them. Is it going to be used? Is it like formative feedback to improve the process as we're going along, or for future processes? Or is it going to be a summative feedback where they are measuring the results and impact of our activity and reporting back to those who are interested in it? So again, just sort of think again about how you're going to be. I've got here. I've got the last slides. It's just got useful resources on there.
Shall I bring the people back in from the breakout room?
If you want to, I think perhaps people aren't so keen to.
I'm curious about the difference between kind of when you're designing evaluation for your own projects, which is often kind of budgetary requirements, and the advantages of having somebody who's not linked to the project doing it, because I've done it both ways, and usually it's like money means I've done it myself, and I'm very aware that there's a whole bunch of confirmation bias that I'm putting into it.
That's an interesting question actually, whether anybody else has thought that through or had the opportunity to pay in for external resources to be able to do an evaluation either of a project or of a specific engagement activity.
It's all a matter of scale.
It is, yeah.
I've done larger projects with outside consultants evaluating where the the report is received in a mixed way because it can actually raise more questions, and they may not have known the process has gone through in the detail that you'd hoped.
Yeah.
So you feel like you've spent a lot and you haven't quite got the depth.
Yes.
Another time it might be exactly what you need to raise that following the question that you then follow up.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I've found that, I mean, yeah, totally. Hear your point. It's been really helpful for saying things that I haven't been able to say myself within a small institution, you know, so there's stuff that we might be anticipating that's a bit uncomfortable for the institution to hear. Doesn't matter how many times we've said it, but if we can actually get an external evaluator to say, look, this is what's being said, for some reason, when it's on the page from somebody outside, all of a sudden,
that's a really interesting point. Yeah.
And that can be quite helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And I just put a bid in now, and it's not, the evaluation isn't just specifically about the engagement activities, it's about the broader evaluation of the success of the partnership. But we're doing it ourselves, and I know the comment will come back. It would be better, be more improved, be more robust if an external partner was doing it, but on the whole, resources will limit your ability to do that. I can see that.
I think we need to make more powerful arguments for the value of an engaged evaluation, an evaluation that emerges from the group of people who are having that engagement in the activity, and particularly in community contexts like Naomi's project or Sally's, where you've got a group of people who are working together to develop something. They're in the best place to judge what it is they want to understand about their activity. I think you can maybe have the value of an you will all need someone to kind of bounce ideas off, and I think maybe that's where you have the consultant. You get someone, a colleague, a fellow academic. You come and talk to someone and say, how does this look to you? So you get that outside view, but it's something that emerges from the group.
Sort of mini peer review almost.
I think there's a real value in that. But I
definitely.
think, and then you can make the case for actually, we want this to happen. This is what we will judge to be success. So we're in the best place to do that.
No, absolutely. No.
And also, if you have that some sort of external component, it actually gives it more authority anyway. It carries more weight.
Yes.
Rather than they're just marking their own homework.
But also in a sensitive situation, I'm thinking, like Zaina or some of the other students who've got very sensitive engagements. Bringing in that outside person could really disrupt the trust that you have among your community.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think that's something that we need to be very careful about.
Yeah. Is that something that you've thought about, Zaina, if you've got that far? Considering you've only just started.
No, right now it's more the methodology I'm writing up. So no, I haven't gotten that far yet.
But that is something that you might need to be mindful of. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
I think going back to Charlotte, she did a second one, which was measure yourself concerns and well-being. And she worked with the Bristol. Again, the empowerment was.
I don't know what's happening. Sorry, Karen.
The decision, it was appropriate. It has to be where it's appropriate, but it was appropriate that each person could set what they wanted. So from whatever the intervention was, and it being the Bristol Cancer Centre, I can always remember there was a lady who said, again, they score at baseline, just said, I need to find out who's going to take care of my cat. And once that's sorted out, I'll feel better. She still had a whole sense of what was possibly going to be her outcome. She was absolutely in palliative care situation. But the cat did get sorted out with a good home, and her sense of peace that came because that when her scoring went up, cancer hadn't changed. In fact, it had advanced. So the medical outcome of that would be, what success looked like. But for her, she could state it, she could talk about it, something practical could happen, and then it was sorted out. And then that was a key thing for her to be able to let be able to let go to get on with what her process was. Yeah, and so again, it has to be appropriate, but that really has taught me a lot
as well.
about,
Yes,
you know, they carry the empowerment, the medical intervention or whatever it is may get the outcome it wants, but it might not be the outcome that the person sees they want.
Yeah.
Just a couple of comments from Katherine. She says, you know, with thinking about objectiveness and lack of vested interest, not necessarily the methods, but totally agrees on the trust point, especially with vulnerable groups, which is precisely what you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't. I picked up on what you were looking at because I know something about what you're talking about, and the infertility. Now, there's going to be a definite situation where, you know, whatever stage that person's at with it, there is a massive ahead for that person's life. You know, so again, it's like what is it that they may feel they are wanting to have acknowledged, or there'll be treatment interventions possibly, there'll be emotional situations, there's a whole layers, isn't there? There's more than one layer going on of where you're affected.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which we had a problem. Pharmaceutical may have one very set situation, which we had a problem with the randomised control trials, which when I was saying I came to the university many years ago and did this degree in complementary health studies, which doesn't exist now, but the big problem was everything had to be, it was not going to be valid unless it went through a randomised control trial, and that was a big issue because an awful lot of the interventions did not match to that criteria at the time.
Yeah, it also means not RCTs, it might be the gold standard, but they're not appropriate for everything. And it's puts far too much weight on evaluation compared to the actual activity sometimes, which I mean, the whole thing gets distorted.
Yeah, that's true. But it comes back down to your first point about appropriateness. Yeah. What we're trying to test, what's a good measure of, well, not test, what we're trying to understand, what's a good measure of that understanding. You know, not the randomised control trial is not good. I just want, hang on. Earlier point about ethnographic approach feels almost irrelevant. Participant observation, which can help bridge we'd stop typing, but it can help bridge something. Issue of trust and. So I'm just, maybe online people, if you just want to type any final comments, and we'll just close it in the last 5 minutes.
Okay. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. Obviously, the slides will be available, and if anybody has got any questions that they'd like to ask me, the non-expert in the room,